Welcome to the Keto Geek Podcast. Let's do this.
Health, nutrition, fitness, low-carb lifestyle.
Welcome back to the Keto Geek Podcast. My name is Fahad and I'm the host of this show. You guys have done a spectacular job with our launch of our chocolate fudge energy pod on Amazon. We have decided to increase the length of the sale and we will be keeping it 15% off till this coming Sunday. So please go ahead and make a purchase. It helps support our podcast, our infrastructure, and everything else. And plus those products taste really good and we've received some amazing reviews from all of the people in the keto sphere. So check it out. The link for Amazon will be in the show notes and you can go there. And if you are interested in our other flavors, you can go to ketogeek.com, which is our regular website, and access them there as well. I personally think of the energy pods as a shelf-stable avocado that I consume with my high-protein meals such as steak. You can turn the foil lid into a spoon, and some of you people were asking, how do you consume it? That's how I personally consume it, just like a pudding. You can also freeze it, and it turns into an ice cream sort of texture, or you can melt it and put it on your protein pancakes. So that's our style. Tack it with some protein, and they are shelf-stable. They don't need to be frozen or cooked or baked or anything, really. And you can consume them anywhere on your journey. A lot of people take them traveling and cross the borders, abroad, everywhere basically. They are loaded with saturated fats from organic and pasture-raised ghee and MCT oil, and they contain real vanilla beans, the real deal, not the filler-filled vanilla that you can see over the counter. In fact, a lot of the ingredients that are in the energy pods, you cannot find them over the counter. We have scoured the entire country looking for the best ingredients we could find, and we have converted them into energy pods. We also have a new flavor coming out in May, and that will be a high-fat, high-protein salted chocolate flavor, kind of like the coffee protein version, but with chocolate in there instead. So we'll keep you guys posted on how that turns out. Right now, we are in full blast mode, really busy working with a bunch of companies. We will be in Keto Crate in May, so you can check those guys out. They have a box of wonderful goodies they send out every month to their subscribers. And so we will be in their box in May. So if you want to check out Keto Crate, you can go to ketokrate.com, and they have their box subscription service there. So really cool people. And so I think that's about it. Besides that, yeah, actually, I'll be going to Hungary next week or so to check out Paleo Medicina. They're a bunch of really cool people, and they use a very meat-based approach to fight chronic conditions. I think I've blasted them practically every week now. And I just think they're onto something. So free plug. Really cool people. But yeah, so I think that's about it as far as all the events and information is concerned. Let's go to this show, which is with Marty Kendall, who's already been on our show. He's a really kick-ass guy, one of the people that I respect, and he is an engineer himself who is interested in nutrition. If you want to check out some of his stuff in the past, you can go into the show notes and you'll access the previous episode that I did with him. He's one of my mentors and a good friend in this nutrition world, and his family is also combating type 1. His wife is combating type 1 diabetes. He also has a blog called optimizingnutrition.com where he has tons of information on various different approaches on Optimizing Nutrition. Sorry, guys and gals, if I sound really tired, I am. We have been working 12, 16, 18 hours per day to do our production and then upload podcasts and just so many different things. So, yeah, anyway, so his blog posts can be found on the website, and he also has the Kick-Ass Optimizing Nutrition Facebook group, which is practically like the Colosseum of Rome. That's how I call it, because he has some of the rock stars in the food and nutrition world there, and they're always butting heads, which is really cool. He also has this project that I think he's practically finalized a lot of it, and it's the Nutrient Optimiser, where he's taken everything he's learned from optimizing nutrition and he's put it into something more practical. And so I would recommend checking that out. And I think that's it. Really smart guy, great friend. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring to you the great Marty Kendall. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Marty Kendall, the owner of the Colosseum, as I call it. Well, it's actually the Optimizing Nutrition Forum blog, everything. You've got like the big top dogs from across the world. You friend them and add them to the group, and they go on to like this Mortal Kombat style fight. I love watching them. How did that begin, by the way?
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I was it 3 years ago, I just started a little Facebook group to go along with my blog to just share the ideas and invited a few friends. And then I think part of it was my the other admin in the group, Mike Julian, as well as myself, just kept on asking dumb questions and just bringing out some really interesting discussion from a lot of amazing people. So yeah, you're right. There's a lot of really interesting open-minded discussion, and it's really tried to be as research-based as it can be without being completely, we only follow the evidence and, mindlessly following research. So interpreting in a how do we optimize nutrition? It's got a bit of a diabetes context, but also a bit of a performance, athletics, bodybuilding, bunch of guys from the ketogene scene in there. And yeah, it's a really, really, really fascinating area that's really free thinking. So yeah, I've learned so much, and it's spurred me on for this journey 3 years down the track. And I posted something on Facebook the other day just going, wow, I've had 2 million views on my blog, and that completely blows my mind. So it's been a fun journey just following the things that I learn from my friends all the time.
I'm scared to post there because I'm afraid that I'll go and fight the wolves. And see, here's the thing. I'm not as intricate about the science and nutrition, just being totally honest. Like, I don't spend hours on Sci-Hub or reading research papers. I just go there for a resource. So I'm afraid that every time I'm going to post, there's going to be some person who's going to find something there and just dismantle my argument completely. So I just go there, do some few likes, ha-has, and hearts and all those things, and I'm done. But here's my question to you, though. Throughout this entire period during your group, since you've come across such great minds, so what are some of the things that may have stuck out to you?
Oh, wow. Probably Mike's theory on diabetes and the evolution of diabetes, and just changing my evolution of that, the understanding of how type 2 diabetes works, and that it's not just an insulin-focused thing. And we mentioned before, we might talk about diabetes and how that evolves, and just the idea that as much as the low-carb camp wants to say, yeah, it's all about insulin and we just want to minimize insulin, which is how I came into the scene, trying to manage my wife's type 1 diabetes and minimize the amount of insulin she takes. So you match. It's true that if you can match the amount of insulin with the food you're eating and not have this massive roller coaster, you get a better outcome. But in the end, it comes back to not overfilling your fat cells to the point where your body goes, okay, I can't take anymore, and it just overflows into your bloodstream, which is effectively, I think, what diabetes is in the long run.
Okay. Now that we've opened the can of worms of type 2 diabetes, I mean, what kind of trends have you noticed? I mean, when did this whole madness begin? I don't know if it was like 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 50 years ago. When did this craze begin?
People keep pointing back to that 1960s, 1970s, when everybody's got a theory of why it happened, the processed foods, omega-6, going fear of fat and going to sugar, and my favorite theory is probably just more and more processed, hyperpalatable food that we just can't stop eating, and it's just really easy to eat to the point of excess without getting the nutrients we need. So yeah, it's convoluted and complex. And then Tucker was talking about omega-6, and that was a fascinating podcast. And it's not my area of expertise, but I think that definitely plays a part of it. But it all comes down to a point that we're trying to be healthy and live as long as we can, while the food system is trying to feed us the cheapest, most hyper-palatable flavored foods that we'll continue to buy and eat more and more of. And what works for them commercially doesn't always work for us physically for optimum health and longevity.
Speaking as a food company ourselves, which we are, well, we've noticed that everything that has like good quality nutrients is ridiculously expensive, and we cannot even compete with some of these food companies who are just have these omega-6 and processed oils. We can't do much about that. So that's a bit of a challenge for us as a food company. And then the catch-22 is if you make something super delicious, that could potentially lead to overconsumption. So we have this interesting battle for our future food companies where we have to work with educators, figure out what works best for you. And that's one thing I really like about your Nutrient Optimiser, that this is one of the tools that could potentially help a lot of companies in the future to gauge what kind of products they could make or what kind of foods they can make and that kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that. But one thing I would like to still go back to is what exactly are ways to quantify type 2 diabetes. And let's talk about, and let's open the can of worms with the whole carnivore madness that's going on. We've had like plenty of these carnivores of the apocalypse show up to our podcast. So you want to take a shot?
Wow. Yeah. You're probably referring to, I did a recent post on Dr. Sean Baker's diet and his blood test results. Rob Wolf came out with a podcast, and it was really fascinating. And I suppose outwardly, Sean looks fantastic. When you look at his blood test results, some of them are interesting. Some of them are like his HbA1c is verging on diabetic, and there's various theories about your white blood cells live longer if you're a certain type of person, and therefore your HbA1c may be affected. But at the same time, his blood sugars were still quite high, and there's a whole range of theories, and I'm not going to try and say that I understand that. I mean, part of it from a nutrient optimizer point of view, I'm a big believer in electrolytes, the importance of having electrolytes like sodium, potassium, magnesium in your diet. I mean, I was listening to the two Keto Dudes podcast yesterday, and Carl Franklin, who's been saying he's been going on a diet of porchetta and fasting, saying he's getting tremors in his arm, which somebody identified with a lack of magnesium. It's like, okay, even in a keto context, these electrolytes are still really important. A lot of people focus on sodium, but it tends to be potassium, I think, is even more fundamentally important, as well as magnesium. And these are the things that we tend to get in green leafy veggies. And I think in a Maasai context, when people were drinking their animal's blood and getting fresh meat, I think we would have got a lot more of those from a carnivore type approach. Whether that's the reason for Sean's lack of insulin sensitivity, or whether it's just a matter of he's taking in 4,000 calories a day and eating upwards of 5 grams per kilo lean body mass to fuel all his activity, and maybe it's a matter of just the human body isn't built to take that much energy all the time that he's using to support his amazing athletic endeavors. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of athletes seem to become insulin resistant over a period of time. You look at Sami Inkinen and Tim Noakes and all these low carb advocates. They were amazing athletes and got to the point where they said, well, I'm diabetic, even though I'm running marathons and triathlons and ultras. And is it just that the body just can't keep up with that much processing energy, especially when it's energy dense and nutrient poor? So again, there's completely different contexts, and that's what we're trying to design the Nutrient Optimiser for, is to say, who are you, what's your context? Just because so-and-so is eating a diet and looks fantastic, you're probably not that person, and just following what they do isn't going to give you the results you need because your current situation and context is different. So that was a long-winded ramble to say I don't know what's going on with Sean Baker, and plenty of other people have got plenty of theories, and it's certainly a fascinating experiment, and I look forward to the N equals many published results. I haven't seen those yet, but I really look forward to those coming out, as well as just Sean's results, which he's shared on the podcast. I haven't seen any hard copy results published, but it'd be great to continue to pursue that. And I think I mentioned to you the Nourish, Balance, Thrive blood chemistry analysis. I'm hoping to do a future post potentially where I look at some zero carbers blood analysis. There was one I mentioned in the post, Amy, who was a zero carber carnivore leading a large group, and then she's not doing that anymore. So potentially I'm going to, run her blood tests through this Nourish, Balance, Thrive analysis that then looks at what nutrients you're deficient in based on the blood tests, based on AI type analysis. So it's an ongoing discussion that I'm fascinated in, and hope to just be a part of that discussion and answering my dumb questions and trying to design a system that will help myself, my wife, my family, and other people, hopefully.
So all these nutrients that have existed throughout time, are they getting diluted beyond like in just processed foods? Like, as an ecosystem, as a global sort of agriculture everywhere, basically. Is there something going on over there?
Yeah. I think there would be. Like if you look at even what we're feeding our cattle, it's a lot of the time, rather than eating grass on rolling hills that were fertilized naturally and had heaps of minerals and, all those romantic paleo sort of pictures. These days they're in feedlots being fed grain, which were fertilized to grow quickly, and not getting a lot of nutrients out of the soil that would have come naturally in that sort of environment. So even the grain that we're feeding our animals that we're eating is not going to be as nutrient dense. And one of my favorite books that keeps influencing my thinking on this is Mark Schatzker's Dorito effect, and he goes back and points to the point where it's a fascinating story, well worth listening to. The point where they realized they could make a normal corn chip taste amazing with all these artificial flavors and chemicals, and no longer did they need to put actual quality food with actual nutrition in. You could chemically mimic an amazing taste, an amazing color that made us as evolved creatures that fruit looks amazing, that food looks amazing because it's colorful and tastes mind-blowing. We can manufacture something that's even better than that. So even the things that are actually nutrient dense taste bland to us, and we're addicted to things that have a whole lot of colors and flavors and artificial things, but actually do the minimal actual nutrients in those foods that we need to survive and thrive and live a long time.
Yes, and that's actually a really good book. I read that, The Dorito Effect. We're kind of like those food companies trying to fight the food companies, as crazy as that sounds. It's a bit of an interesting challenge for us. But I think if you develop a following that people go, well, we're trying to give real food with real content, even if it's more of an energy-based fat bomb type thing that has real nutrients in it, that comes from real butter and real ghee and
real quality product, then there's a lot of people that will really benefit from that because it comes from real food that contains real quality fats, even if it is a bit more expensive. So I think unless you're going to live on offal, which is certainly nutrient dense, there's only a small amount of people who will do that, even I don't eat as much offal as I'd like to. I think people need to understand that they need to pay sometimes a little bit more to get a quality outcome in their body, which is, they're going to live a whole lot longer, live a better quality of life. Worth the investment.
Yeah, and we're noticing this everywhere. I think for me, when I approach this problem, I look at it from a much more retreated perspective, if that makes any sense. Like, I look at the human desire to seek comfort, pleasure, and cater to their taste, and that leads us to create foods that are cheaper, and this competitive drive in the food industry to lower the cost of products and then to just compete with each other for more profits so that they can have their yacht or whatever. So I think that sort of competitive drive is what's killing us all, because and like I said, it's an interesting challenge, but we'll fight it. We'll work with people like yourself. We're going to work. We've already brought educators, and let's make this world a little better than what it is. And what's interesting is there's in the agricultural community, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect. Like the profit margins on those sort of products is very low, and they can't be like, oh, let's sponsor Low Carb USA or any of those kind of things. So there's that bit of a challenge for a lot of these certain conferences that seek sponsorship. So I hope that's making some sense how complicated the problem is and how science can be so pushed and pulled by certain profit-based agendas.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think what we need is a way of cutting through to show, well, these are the foods that are actually good for us, because it's been masked by the flavors and colorings that make those foods so attractive, and no longer are we looking at we've lost our ability to differentiate between good and bad food with our appetite.
Okay. So what kind of stuff happens when you have type 2 diabetes? Like, as in, what kind of markers should we look for? Like let's go somewhat to the basics.
Yeah. Okay. Going back to type 2. I suppose fundamentally it's a type 2 diabetes is diagnosed with a blood sugar marker that is above a certain level, and optimum fasted correlates to about 83 milligrams per deciliter, which is 4.6 millimoles per litre in Australian or the rest of the outside US measurements. In terms of HbA1c, anything under 5 is excellent, and then Sean Baker was 6.3, and then anything above 6.4 is considered full-blown diabetes, that then you start looking at drugs and insulin and those sorts of things. Although outwardly Sean looks fantastic, there's something going on with his HbA1c that other people can't explain. I don't think that's a across-the-board thing for carnivores, and as I said before, it'll be great when all that N=many data comes out for everybody to have a look at and see how we can compare and whether do carnivore blood markers differ while they're still healthy and have an excellent longevity. Do things move? And that's a fascinating question, and a lot of the time things have just been calibrated. And one of the criticisms of the Nutrient Optimiser, things have been calibrated to people on a Western diet, and that's fair to an extent. I think just going forward, we need to look at how we can continue to recalibrate markers like that for different people in different situations. So to go on with the diabetes, a lot of the time people with diabetes have an expanded waistline. The adipose tissue increases basically as your fat stores can't they expand to a point where they get inflamed and they can no longer hold that excess energy you're putting into it, so they get stored in more insulin sensitive areas like your kidneys and your liver and your pancreas and your heart and your brain, and that it all comes down to an extent to that excess energy being stored. And then I think the ultimate interesting question is, how do we step back and say, well, what is driving us to eat more energy than we need? Is it a desire for the nutrients we're not getting from our diet? Is it just the fact that we treat food as entertainment? Is it the fact that we don't have to chase it down to hunt and gather it? It's just so easy and cheap. I mean, what is it? Is it our food is always, in front of a device and we just mindlessly eat and don't think about what we're eating, or it's so cheap and just now so easy to get so much of? And they're interesting questions. And how do we reverse engineer those things? And a lot of the time, just whichever way you look at it, it comes back to eating whole foods that similar to what they're found in nature, similar to what we ate before the advent of processed foods, and that works pretty well for us from whatever angle we look at it, whether it's a carnivore or vegan or paleo or whatever brand you put on it. That's where you end up. But in today's situation where things are dominated so much by our advertising commercial interests, and we just have a bias to follow people we want to emulate, like Beyonce drinking Pepsi or our football team drinking beer or whatever that is, and the person with the best butt photo on Instagram, we want to buy the protein powder that they're holding. That's how we tend to make decisions on a visceral gut instinctive reaction, because life is too complex to analyze. We as humans can only hold so many things in our brain at once, and our working memory is finite, so we just work out shortcuts to make decisions based on taste or following someone that looks amazing, or whether it's cheap or whatever it is. And I think it's the interesting question is, as engineers with data available to us and people trying to reverse engineer nutrition, what parameters, what principles do we apply to help us understand that and use the technology available to make better decisions to optimize our longevity and quality of life, so we can thrive and think and have fun and play and enjoy the rest of life when we're not talking and thinking about nutrition.
Yeah, keep it simple. So there's this one video that I posted in our Keto Geek group, and you, I think, commented on it, and it was about nutrient. It was by Jay Stanton. And he talks about nutrient-driven satiety to some extent. Is there some evidence to that?
There's not enough, and people ask me that a lot. And Joel Furman has done some interesting studies on his group. He's a big advocate of nutrient density and sort of one of my influences. He's got a very strong vegan bias, plant-based bias that I think what I tried to do is basically build a system that took into account fatty acids and proteins, which he seemed to ignore, and I ignored all the things that really were a bit shaky and flimsy. But his analysis shows that people who are maximizing nutrient-dense foods have a lowered satiety. A lot of people who have tried the Nutrient Optimiser just find, hey, when I focus on nutrient-dense foods, I just don't find I need to eat as much, and I'm satisfied with less food. And there are some studies that talk about individual nutrients and that we continue to crave more and more food, particularly protein. The protein satiety is really strong, and we continue to eat food until we get enough protein, because preservation of lean muscle mass is really, really important. It's called the protein leverage hypothesis. But at the same time, what I see is that protein and nutrient density overall are often very closely interrelated. So I think while there's not as much quantified research to say that, you need nutrients to experience satiety, I think it's it's very likely and anecdotally very strong. So there's some research to indicate good nutrient density leads to satiety, but I suppose it comes back to who's funding it and who's going to be out there saying, if you ate liver and beef and spinach, then and mackerel, then you're going to have a higher satiety. There's nobody out there funding that sort of research at the moment, unfortunately. That'd be a challenge for anybody wanting to fund research to look at the satiety factor of a nutrient-dense diet.
And here's the big question then, is who's going to actually fund these studies? Like, do you have any ideas or how that works? Like, how do they figure out that a grant or a study needs to be funded outside of supplement companies? Seems like they have a lot of money.
Yeah, and I read an article by Darius Muzaffaryan, who is, I think, Stanford nutrition researcher that I got a level of respect for, and he's saying, research is always going to be more and more funded by food companies, and there's always going to be those conflicts of interest, and even you could look at the research that comes out of Harvard that always seems to be favoring that bias toward plant-based or agriculture-based, and the USDA also seems to be heavily biased towards an agriculture-centric, i.e. grains and sugar and hyper-palatable food, and unfortunately, I don't know, but I suppose optimizing nutrition is just trying to play a part in that, moving that discussion forward. And you look at the online groups, and I think maybe it's the online community, the Facebook communities, these sort of blogs that are going to podcasts like yourselves that are going to drive that thinking forward, and that a lot of the time that the ability to have a hive mind, complementary experts working together to move forward in a really dynamic approach is going to make researchers have to stand up and take notice, because keto or low carb or paleo or whatever is going to, those things have gone through trends that are dwarfing, swamping the influence that a lot of the time official messages have, and people listen to those instead of the official message, because the official message just doesn't seem to be working anymore.
There's a reason why we don't call our product Keto Pods, and this was the exact reason why we wanted to provide some of the educators like yourself and others a platform to speak on. But you still need some money. You need to monetize everything and take that knowledge and somehow make it more practical. So that was the goal, is what can you put inside a cup? And that could potentially be maybe some testing, maybe some fun with food, something like that. So that was our intention initially. And we don't want to be, even though our business name says Keto Geek right now, but we're open to being outside of that sort of sphere. And this brings us to another sort of question that I have for you, is like, how do you know that you're not trapped in some sort of a dogmatic or very strict position?
Everybody's got their biases, I suppose. And that's, I mentioned to you that I'm reading or listening to an Audible Ray Dalio's book Principles, and Ray is the head of Bridgewater Capital, who's the most successful hedge fund trading fund in the world at the moment. And it's really fascinating to go through and listen to his story of designing systems and radical transparency, and their whole business is set up to have complete transparency, and that you basically rank things based on how realistic and how reasonable they sound, and anybody in the company can give the CEO a fail mark and give that blatantly honest feedback. And they crave that because he says, we need that feedback to evolve, and we need that brutally honest feedback to evolve in a rapid manner and avoid, for them, it's major financial market crashes, and they need their company to function optimally so they can design systems that work optimally. And I suppose I've got a background as a civil engineer trying to implement multi-criteria analysis, and a while back I dabbled a fair bit in systems trading as well in a similar sort of way, trying to design systems that looked at the real data and tried to make the most of financial market data and looking at what worked and going back 20, 30 years and back testing those beliefs, those approaches, and refining. I suppose that's what we've then tried to do with the Nutrient Optimiser, to work out the fundamental principles that work and then encapsulate those into a system that we're then putting out there and getting feedback and getting people to try it and giving those responses. And yeah, so you've got to work with the principles that you know are real and that work, and then put it out there and get feedback. And it's the good thing about the Optimising Nutrition group is, like yourself, even if I post something that, you know, there's plenty of people out there who will tell me I'm barking up the wrong tree or full of it and cut me down too. So, you know, it's a really good environment to have that group and to have the online world that will refine those ideas. And I think it can be really beneficial. It can be dangerous at the same time. When we get into our little subcultures online, we can just be exposed to the things that we like and the things that our friends like and the things that our acquaintances like, and we never have to be challenged. So that online democratization of knowledge can be really powerful, but it can be dangerous at the same time.
Well, here's a little bit of a problem, though. How do you know when to stop? And this is a common theme question that comes around. Like, if I'm a person who's just out there to be healthy and I don't want to go down to the nth degree of information, and let's say I'm just a guy who, I don't know, cleans cars, for example, and I want to be healthy. But the problem is I'm not smart enough, and I'm just talking, to be honest, I'm talking about myself.
Yep.
So, how does a dummy like me go into the information, like too much information, and condense it down and simplify?
It can be difficult to go into the fundamental research, and there's people like Gabor and Rafi, and who you've talked to and had on the podcast, and Mike, and all these people who understand biochemistry and the studies at a really fundamental level, and understand. I just wish I had a deeper understanding of biochem, and I'm really jealous of that, and I'm in the same position to an extent. But I think looking at that intimate detail you have to stand back and say, well, what does work? What are the big levers that make a big difference? And that's what we've tried to embed into the Nutrient Optimiser that looks at insulin load. So for people with diabetes, they want to manage their insulin load so that they're not eating so much insulinogenic food that they can't keep their blood sugar stable. So there's a lot of controversy over insulin, and is that, is anything insulinogenic naturally fattening? I don't think we can say that, and I think even Chris Gardner's recent Diet Fit study indicated that, whether just general run-of-the-mill people who don't have full-blown diabetes, whether it's high-fat or low-fat diet quality wins. So I think, but at the same time, for people who are diagnosed diabetic, then reducing the insulin load, reducing their blood sugars will help them. I think another factor is nutrient density that we've talked about. So looking at the nutrients that you're currently missing in your diet and trying to improve those. Energy density, just making sure that if, like, you're a athlete and trying to get a lot of energy in, you can have an energy pod, and if you need to get that energy in. But if you're obese and you need less energy, then if hyperpalatable refined fat was all you ate, then maybe that'll be a challenge for you. And then I think the other principle is probably calories still matter, but how do we reverse engineer that to make sure we don't make everything so hyperpalatable we can just continue to jam in more and more calories. So, yeah, we've tried to design a system that will just help people that just want to say, well, tell me what to eat. There's simple food lists, simple meal lists that will take you from your current context based on your blood sugars, your ketones, your weight, your BMI, your waist measurement, whatever data you've got, however much data you want to give it. And I suppose that's our challenge at the moment, is saying, for the super user who is a complete biohacker geek, let's design something that you can use your breast ketones and your blood sugars and everything, but then at the same time, how do we scale it? So for the person who just wants to say, well, what do I eat today? Let's try and get a breakfast that's nutrient dense and starts you off for the day, that gives you a lot of nutrients, that doesn't blow your blood sugars out of the water, and you can start the day healthy and happy, and then you're probably going to make better choices for the rest of the day, and then tomorrow you'll make another nutrient-dense choice for breakfast, and then maybe lunch, and so it's a journey, and we're trying to design with the Nutrient Optimiser something that is scalable, that you can start in the shallow end and go to the deep end if you want to. But it's definitely a challenge.
My concern normally is that in the intellectual sphere, people who have been on this podcast are pretty cool and laid back. Pretty awesome people. But sometimes you walk into these intellectual spheres and it feels like rustling the hornet's nest. And so you go over there and you say, hey, I have a question. Something needs to be answered. And it turns into a boxing match rather than something that, I want to learn, and you're the expert on the matter. And I actually want some questions answered. I want to learn more things. Yep. But sometimes they just want to put you down thinking that you're an expert. I'm like, I'm not an expert. I'm an idiot. So I want to know the answers to this question. So do you have any tips and strategies?
Oh, wow. I suppose that's just a general cultural thing that, trying to design and foster and set example of a culture in groups that takes that forward. And we all, sometimes nutrition can be like you say, a boxing match and an adversarial, my idea versus your idea. And it doesn't need to be that. But But at the same time, I think it's okay if it's got to be a survival of the fittest. It's got to be, you can't always be, your idea is fantastic and you can't be politically correct completely in a scientific world. You've got to call out good and bad and right and wrong, and based on the evidence that we currently have. So that doesn't work because of this and this, and that's the only way science can move forward and our understanding can move forward as a group. And as I said before, we've all, I think, as part of the Optimising Nutrition group, moved forward a lot in our understanding over the last few years.
Yeah. So, by the way, just so everybody's clear on this page, and you've mentioned it before, and it is because of you people and everybody else, like, I am totally on that page that I say that a lot of fat can actually make you gain weight, or it can actually stall or buffer or whatever the problem is. And our products are relatively high in fat. So if you're going to be eating a lot of those, then it might be detrimental to your fat loss goals. So in those cases, that can be an issue. But here's an interesting thing, though. There are certain people that seem to add a lot of fat to their diet, and then I think they lower their protein, and they seem to be losing a lot of weight. I would imagine that's because they're still in an energy deficit state.
Yeah, I mean, they're the fascinating questions that you see, and that's where the internet is a fascinating world, that there's a whole lot of people in different situations. And what you see a lot of the time is people who are eating hyperpalatable food, a lot of processed carbohydrates, they start not fearing fat and adding fattier foods that don't contain processed, hyperpalatable, excessively flavored, sugared carbohydrates, and they move towards that fat, and their insulin drops and their blood sugars drop, and they get a better handle on their appetite. I think, like you say, naturally they tend to the weight falls off them and they go, this is fantastic. But sometimes it like Tyler from Ketogain says, it works until it doesn't. They get to a point where they tend to stall out, and at that point they go, well, keto works for me, adding more fat works for me, and there's a subset of keto that says calories don't matter at all, and it's all about the insulin. They tend to, start going, well, I just need to eat more fat and drop my protein because that's insulinogenic. And a lot of those people just tend to add weight and pack on weight. I mean, it's all different and context specific, and every person's different, but that's a trend that a lot of us see. And in optimizing nutrition, and people like Mike Julian and Alex Leaf and the Ketogains guys see that dropping protein a lot, like your body just wants survival is all about maintaining muscle mass. And if you cut protein so much that you can't maintain muscle mass, then your appetite is going to be going, give me more food, give me more energy. I'm just going to eat and eat and eat until I get enough protein. So that can be a massive risk. But at the same time, if you're battling cancer or have some therapeutic issue where you're trying to stem growth and slow growth and maximize your ketones so you can you feed your neurons and keep your brain, like Amy Berger talks about, your brain isn't getting enough energy from glucose because it's become insulin resistant. You're in a therapeutic ketogenic diet can be useful, but I think there's a lack of differentiation there between what works for a therapeutic ketogenic diet and someone who's just obese or has general run-of-the-mill type 2 or even type 1 diabetes. So I think that's a differentiation that we've tried to flesh out in Optimizing Nutrition and all the blog posts, and then the Nutrient Optimiser will sort of do an intake and say, who are you, what are your goals, do you really need therapeutic keto, or do you just need a nutrient-dense whole foods diet that will keep you full, you won't be able to overeat, and you don't have to fear fat if your blood sugars are elevated, but don't go out and binge on it. And there might be a point where your blood sugars stabilize, where you can start to wind the dietary fat down, and then you can use your own body fat more easily.
So here's something interesting that is a thought process, not anything really beyond. There's no study about it. Maybe you have some ideas on this. Let's think about this. So a low carb diet, if you think about it, is eliminating a lot of the processed carbs and processed oils. And so it seems like an elimination diet. So the results could be argued that it's because of diversity restriction and elimination rather than, ketones or some sort of biological mechanism, or is it a combination of both?
I'd probably more avoidance of the hyperpalatable foods that are going to continue to drive your appetite and want more food. So it's really easy to just sit there and eat the Doritos or Tim Tams or whatever it is that you love eating, and that can come in, bulletproof coffee or whatever it is that can be easy to, I'll have 3 of those because it's got no carbs in it for breakfast.
That's interesting.
I think it's more a way of hacking satiety, and that's probably my ultimate question: is how do you reverse engineer? How do you hack satiety so that I found. Recently did the Ketogains boot camp and had a great time, and tracking everything and working out and making sure you're maintaining heaps of protein with a calorie deficit worked wonders for me, and I've dropped 8 kilos in the last few months. But I don't want to track forever, and I want to form new habits, and I think that's everybody's goal, is to get to the point where they habitually are used to eating foods that will give them the nutrients they need and give them satiety so that they're not craving. You don't want to always be in a deprivation situation, and that's where if you just say, well, calories are the only thing that matters, then it's all about deprivation. And if you've got minimal calories with minimal nutrition, then you're in you're in a point where you're going to rebound. You're going to get to the point where you go, I need food. I'm going to eat. And as soon as you come across that point where nobody's watching and you've got your favorite food in front of you, you're just going to go for it. So, you need to hack nutrition to the point where you don't always have to manually count and track calories.
That would be a dream come true where I don't have to track anything, to be honest. But that's just me, because I'm one of those people who like to say, I want to drive the car. I want to have the experience of the car. I just don't want to know what kind of fuel I'm going to put in there or whatever, all the mechanics and the dynamics. But I'm just like one of those people who likes to seek that sort of lifestyle. And as far as the bulletproof coffee is concerned, I've noticed that at least on myself, it's one of the most disgusting things that I can drink, because I don't know about other people, but there are certain things that I've noticed that since I was raised in a very different culture for 18 years, I haven't been able to develop taste for certain foods. Like, for example, butter has never been that appealing to me as its own. So it's interesting. Maybe there's a cultural play or a dynamic or any of those kind of things that are in play when it comes to satiety, hunger, and coping, using food as a coping mechanism. I don't know. So it seems like a vast ocean of exploration.
Yeah, totally.
So
fascinating rabbit hole. Yeah. And like, I mean, what your mum cooked for you and made you feel loved is a really massive influence. And what did grandma cook, and that bowl of pasta or whatever it was back in your homeland. And, those things are hard when you need comfort. That's what you go for. So, yeah. Well, or even for me, one of the challenges is becoming, I've with the journey with my wife with type 1 diabetes, for a period of believing that, low carb was everything and fat could do no wrong. It's hard to move on from even that paradigm to say, well, yeah, maybe the butter and cream and peanut butter all jammed on a spoon infinitely is not going to help me be ripped and shredded like a lot of my online friends. So, yeah.
Hasn't butter and all of these foods existed for a huge amount of time? But at the same time, the trend, now this is based on no study at all, but I think going in line with what Tucker said, that everywhere we have Western influence, we have screwed up, and the obesity and diabetes seems to go up. Unless there are exceptions to this in certain cultures where Westernization isn't there, or the foods that are here haven't gone there, but still they have high amounts of diabetes and all the diseases.
Yeah, for sure. Butter has always been around to some degree, but, how did you churn that butter? How much effort did it take to churn that butter? You had to go milk the cow, and, it always took some effort to some degree to churn butter and make cream. And these days it's just, it's cheap and available on the shelf and available. And, yeah, and if everybody says you can have as much as you want of that because you believe in the power of bulletproof coffee because Dave Asprey said it was fantastic, then you may go to excess at that point. So, yeah, there's always going to need to be those checks and balances that bring you back, and that's where quantifying some things to a degree, like tracking body fat and, your weight or your waist or something, just to go, well, let's keep myself honest so I'm making sure that I'm not overdoing it. And that's one thing I'm trying to do for myself at the moment and incorporate into the Nutrient Optimiser is say, well, how do I make sure I'm maximizing weight loss and maximizing or minimizing muscle loss, I suppose, because anytime you start to lose weight, unless you're a complete newbie lifter, you're going to lose some muscle. So I'm trying to calibrate the system to say, okay, once you've got your blood sugars down and you've reduced your carbs to the point where your blood sugars are excellent, let's make sure you've got enough protein that'll support your muscle retention if you're trying to have a deficit. But if you're trying to go for therapeutic keto, like we talked about before, how do we tweak it and get your protein to a point where you can get the ketones that you're chasing? That's completely got me infatuated at the moment, is trying to design those systems and then incorporate that into an automated dashboard that people can follow and go in one end and just go, what do I do this week and what do I do next week? And then continue to to journey through that like an automated coach based on the best systematized data that we have and research that we have.
How do you know a diet works?
Well, does it work for you? Is it working? Is it working for you? A lot of the time, some people really thrive with the carnivore approach because, like I said in that post, their gut is messed up to the point where they've been eating so much, or maybe it was cesarean or whatever the issue was, that their gut microbiome and their digestion is so messed up that they need to go for a full elimination. But do you feel good? Do you feel satisfied? Do you feel like you're thriving? Do you have energy? And do you look in the mirror and say, I feel good about myself, I feel like I'm moving in the right direction? And a lot of the time we struggle with confirmation bias, that we look in the mirror and go, yeah, you look fantastic, and maybe we don't. So yeah, that's a challenge, just to overcome our own confirmation bias, that we like to think we're better than we are.
Okay, so there's this common theme among people would say, okay, I'm doing energy or calorie restriction, and yet I have been stalling for a year. Is that, or maybe I'm just lying?
Yeah. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. And is your body craving nutrients? Is it down regulating the energy expenditure? Intermittent fasting and some level of intermittency seems to be really important, whether your period is a daily period or a weekly period, or like Lyle McDonald talks about diet breaks. And if you're restricting calories for 6 weeks and then you have a diet break for a week or two where no longer are you tracking calories, and you just let things reset and then you can go again. And the reality is that your body does down-regulate expenditure and the energy it uses, but that's not altogether a bad thing, because, the other end of the extreme is if you're continually hammering in 5,000, 6,000 calories a day, your body has got to ramp up that metabolism to burn off all the excess energy so you don't get obese and you don't carry more weight than you need to. So by throwing a whole lot of energy at your body, you're going to stress it. And I think that's partially where diabetes comes in. You get inflamed and insulin resistant, and your body just can no longer compensate for that energy excess. So as we talked about before, I think that the holy grail is to say, well, what foods should I eat that will give me the nutrients I need and give me satiety to the point where I don't crave any more food and I'm satisfied and I enjoy it.
Yeah, one of the arguments people have for the bulletproof coffee is, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm playing devil, not the advocate. Wait, isn't that Dave Asprey? I'm just kidding. So the bulletproof coffee, some people say it helps me from going insane, as if I'm sort of latched and restricted. Personally, I think that's a pretty solid argument. What do you think? Sure.
Yeah, sure. I did it when the bulletproof coffee thing was a craze. I did it, and it, I've got photos online though where I looked in the mirror and went, geez, I'm 110 kilos and I don't look so good. I look sick and inflamed, and that's not so good. So, maybe you don't go insane. Maybe it gives you energy. Maybe it gives you fuel for your brain to think, and that's a good thing. But if you're also wanting to avoid all the things that come along with chronic excess energy and forcing your body to deal with all that excess energy, whether it be becoming insulin resistant, obese, having to burn off all that excess, then maybe feeling good all the time from chocolate, Macca's, sugar, bulletproof coffee, or whatever your drug of choice isn't. Maybe you need to find another way of comforting yourself that isn't primarily food. Although food should be fun and enjoyable, and food needs to be pleasurable at the same time, but it can't be your only solace.
Yeah, and that's where let's open up a broad new topic, which is experience as a human being and going out there and hunting for something that you want in life. And so I think we were talking about this, that like, what do we do next, or how do, as human beings, we can continue our research, keep an open mind. And even though I'm pretty much like a very carnivorous person at this moment in my life, I still like to dabble into some of the plants, and I'm more than happy to accept them and look out for them and adapt them into my life, because I think that we should explore, we should get outside of the comfort zone. And that's how human beings have evolved, by getting out and trying new things. So what about yourself?
In what regard? What am I doing?
As in, what kind of new outlook or philosophy that drives you, or is there something that moves you forward? Or do you want me to rephrase this question?
Oh, no, I'm always experimenting and trying to learn and just keep up with my friends. And, I've made some really interesting online friends, and likes of Mike and Rob Wolf and Ted Naiman and Lewis and Tyler and all these amazing people that keep me moving forward. And it's good to have that peer group that just continue to inspire you and push you forward. And what gives me a buzz at the moment is just working with individuals that I'm trying to take through the process and sort of basically prototype these people through the process of the Nutrient Optimiser dashboard and teach them to use it. And I'm trying to build a whole range of N=1s and say, look, these people followed this and this is their story. And having really good results in stabilizing blood sugars and seeing their weight loss, and then designing a system that will be addictive and simple and continue to move them forward. So other than the day job, which pays for me to do this in my spare time, that's what drives me forward and keeps me fascinated. And it's just, as you said, it's a fascinating rabbit hole, and just trying to share it and learn and continue to put it out there. And as I get criticism and feedback and other questions and see other challenges online, I continue to try and answer those questions with the systematized tools that I have, which people seem to find unique and interesting and useful. So, it just drives me to continue to move that discussion forward and be a part of it.
And the Nutrient Optimiser is open to everybody, as in doesn't have to be a specific diet, right? Or
no.
Yeah.
We've got a free report, which is basically a macro calculator on steroids. So it gives you macronutrient ranges. So if you say, well, I'm not diabetic and, I want to be really active, it'll give you your target range of grams of food from protein, fat and carbs, and then gives you a range of foods and meals that will align with that. And then there's a full report that is more detailed. But all of those can be calibrated whether you're choosing to be vegan, plant-based, or carnivore, or you've got diabetes and you want to manage that, or you're an athlete and you want to fuel for that, or you've got digestive issues and you want to eliminate things in your diet that are challenging to digest or give you a certain reaction. And there's different autoimmune protocols and the like that we've got programmed into that. And I mean, Rafi said, can we have a shellfish-free approach? And we added that in. So, there's different people seem to respond, I think, largely due to autoimmune issues in different ways. So, I think that's an important thing. And that's where the carnivore diet's fantastic, is that it basically eliminates everything that is inflammatory and causes an autoimmune reaction. But at the same time, I don't think everybody needs to go to that extreme, and some nutrients like magnesium, potassium are easier to obtain from some plant-based foods, although then there's the bioavailability discussion, which is a whole fascinating rabbit hole. And at the same time, we get to a point where we say we don't know and we don't have enough data to answer all and quantify all those issues. But we're moving forward and trying to say, well, this is what in the future we need to quantify bioavailability of nutrients, so we have a better understanding of how we can truly optimize our diet and what the right diet to give you the nutrients you need is.
Well, these carnivores still drink coffee, by the way. Just want to let in you the secret. but it's really,
everybody drinks coffee.
Every mammal, well, human.
Every mammal. But caffeine.
But here's the next week I'm going to be flying to Hungary, and I will be visiting those guys, the Paleomedicina, and that will be a really interesting experience. And they also have an online stream, so if somebody, including you, have a few shells to spare, that might be a great way to look into the whole meat-based approach towards some of these conditions. And I do agree with you and on the fact that not everybody has to become a carnivore. And that my argument is less health-based and more goes back to the human experience aspect of it. If you can experiment with different kinds of foods, if you can try new things and have them complement your life, I just don't see a harm in that sort of approach. And that's why I really respect the Nutrient Optimiser. Despite the fact that I'm a carnivore, relatively, I really respect that because you open up a genre of exploration. And I think that's way more important than being just stuck with one thing. So I think I bow down to that. Yeah,
and to be honest, I'm completely fascinated by what they're doing in Hungary with Paleomedicina and all the online zero-carb carnivore groups, and just trying to understand what it is what are those principles that make people thrive. And for I suppose a lot of what I'm doing is designed around my wife's experience and seeing the different foods that she can tolerate and can't tolerate, and she can't. I mean, a lot of the recipes that are nutrient dense contain a lot of eggs, and she can't tolerate a lot of eggs or a massive amount of fat and large amounts of beef, and eating steak all the time leaves her struggling to dose with the right amount of insulin to keep her blood sugar stable. And I mean, there's different people have different circumstances, and what they're doing. Your interview with the Paleomedicina guys was fantastic and fascinating, and I look forward to more information getting out there into the public sphere. Yeah, and that'll be great. And by no way do I dismiss any of that, the benefit of carnivore, and there's definitely people who benefit from it. Is it optimal for everybody? I'm not sure, and I think we just need to all keep our minds open and say, well, what are the fundamental principles that are making this work for these people, and why do you go from the zero carb groups over to the plant-based vegan groups, and they've all got the same belief in their diet that it works amazingly, and you say, well, what is it that works for these people and these people? What are the fundamental principles of nutrition that work across the whole human spectrum that aren't just religious belief based?
We've been trying to find someone who's vegan and who really would be more than happy to come on board after a parade of carnivores on our podcast. So we've got that a bit of a challenge there. If you have any recommendations, I'm open to it.
Actually, on that, Carrie Diulis is a type 1 diabetic who's vegan, just because that works for her, and she actually understands nutrition in a non-dogmatic way. I'll put you guys in contact. That could be a fascinating discussion.
I think Dr. Ted Naiman tweeted that to her, and I tweeted through Keto Geek back to her as well. Oh, did we just call her out in public?
You'll have to come on, Carrie.
Oh man, Marty, you just ruined it for her. And so, but it would be cool. I think I'm very open to figuring out what's going on over here, because we've kind of beaten the carnivore train to death by now, and I think it's just like fascinating. Like you just said, why does this work, and how does this work, and how can we apply that practically to improve the whole ecosystem, the whole world, the people in it? And for me, the quest is much about that. Actually, it's like, let's create some great human beings, because I think none of these biomarkers or any of this thing would move if the person doesn't intend that to happen. So I think that's where my quest is: create amazing human beings above everything, whether it's keto, vegan, whatever it is. it's a subset. Is that how you think?
Definitely. Yeah, we all just want to feel better and continue. It's a really important question because we're faced with challenges that, most people are faced with. I'm not thriving as well as I want to, and the obesity, diabetes is spiraling out of control, and economically it's threatening to cripple us. So it's basically a national security issue acknowledged by the army, and that economically we're not going to be able to continue to fund people if we continue to just chow down on the comfort foods that big food keeps throwing at us. It's a real issue.
Yeah. So I think we've covered practically all bases, and we've got into some interesting dialogue. And I wanted to have this conversation with you after so many like a year, like going to a good old friend guru and be like, "Hey, what's cracking?" So
thanks, man.
You're hosting a summit somewhere in there, aren't you?
Yeah,
I heard about it.
We threw the idea out there about having an optimizing nutrition summit, just because, as you mentioned, there's a whole bunch of really interesting people that we've got contact with and made contact with, and trying to flesh out the issues that seem to be relevant to us. And a lot of them we talked about today, looking at the role of micronutrients versus macronutrients, and the microbiome and the lipid centric view of diabetes versus glucose, and how to optimize diet for different people, and then this whole plant-based versus carnivorous, and why does that work for some people? Is it bioavailability and anti-nutrients, and what do we need to research and digest to continue to move this nutrition discussion forward? So yeah, looking at doing that with Mike, Julian, and myself, interviewing a bunch of people, and probably won't come out until early next year, but could be an interesting little project to push on with.
Bioavailability sounds like a very interesting topic from where I stand at the moment. And is there any research that has come out or going on about that, or is that a very tough nut to crack?
Yeah, it's basically a tough nut to crack. I've talked to the best people that I can get onto, and there's if you're eating your oysters with spinach, which have got oxalates, then maybe you're not digesting as much zinc, but should it stop you eating your spinach if you enjoy spinach and it doesn't affect you? Then probably not, is my assessment. But there's just is little smatterings of interesting research, but not enough to really give us enough to quantify it and solve the arguments. So.
Okay, here's a little fun question here. Let's say that a news headline came out that sugar causes cancer, or coconut oil causes some sort of a nuclear meltdown in your body. What do you do? What would Marty Kendall do?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I think there's a momentum of research discussion out there that you shouldn't just flip-flop from one trend to another, and there's long-term trends in nutrition and research, and I don't know, I'm sure my Optimising Nutrition group would have a lot of interesting things to say about it, but we need to continue to add a new knowledge that makes sense in the bigger picture of what we've got, while trying to drop our confirmation biases as much as we can. So nutrition should move slowly forward, but not just flip-flop with the media headlines, which are often from funded research that may not, can sometimes be disingenuous.
All right, sounds fantastic. I think we've blasted through several different topics, and we've talked to a lot of different things. I mean, do you have any final notes?
No, it's been a whole lot of fun. Thanks, Fahad. It's good to form a friendship with you online and get to chat via Skype occasionally too.
All of you educators hate us food companies, so we kind of find ourselves really
we can
alone.
Work together.
I really want to, but it would be really good, us taking some charge in this battle and working with you guys and really creating products that help everybody, even if it's through pleasure, happiness, adherence, whatever the concept is.
No, that's great. I'm really looking forward to coming out, and thanks so much for being a part of it.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Marty, for being on this show. It was a fun blast conversation. And lastly, how can people find you?
optimizingnutrition.com, Nutrient Optimiser, and there's a few things under Optimizing Nutrition on Facebook. That's great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the show. You can visit us at ketogeek.com to check out our premium keto-friendly and low-carb food products, including our infamous energy pods, made from the best ingredients we could find in the entire country. We also recommend signing up for our newsletter at ketogeek.com/signup, where you get exclusive discounts, rewards, product announcements, and the latest content we are working on. You also get a 10% discount on your entire order when you sign up. Go to ketogeek.com/signup to join the low-carb playground.